Hello there, and welcome to the weekly Outside Views report on American politics. Former US President Donald Trump caused a stir with a photo recently. In a recording leaked to the Philadelphia Inquirer, Trump can be seen next to convicted former mob boss Joseph Skinny Joe Merlino. The photo is said to have been taken earlier this month at Trump's golf club in West Palm Beach in Florida. It shows Trump with a red baseball cap. He is framed by two men, all showing thumbs up. To Trump's right, Merlino poses in a grey t-shirt. It's not known who the third man is. Merlino belonged to the American Cosa Nostra. He was convicted of racketeering in 2001 and subsequently served a decade in prison. In 2018, he was convicted of gambling. He has been free again since 2020. In an interview with Vice, mafia expert Scott Bernstein called Merlino a criminal icon who can be put in the same breath as the most dynamic, dashing, and ambitious mob leaders of all time. According to the Philadelphia Inquirer, Merlino is no longer active in organized crime and instead works as a waiter in a restaurant. It is unclear whether Trump knew who he was posing with for the photo. He takes countless photos with different people every day, that was said by a spokesman for the ex-president. However, that does not mean that he knows everyone. The spokesman did not answer whether Trump specifically knew Merlino and his past. After the storming of the government district in Brasilia, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva replaced the commander of the army. Today, together with Defense Minister José Mucio, I spoke to General Tomás Miguel Ribeiro Paiva, the new commander of the army, is what Lula wrote on Twitter on Saturday, and wished the new commander all the best for his work. Ribeiro Paiva, who succeeds Julio César de Arruda, was previously commander of the Southeast Command based in Sao Paulo. He said in a video this week that the election results must be respected to guarantee democracy. On January 8th, supporters of President Jair Bolsonaro, who had just been replaced by Lula, stormed Congress, the seat of government, and the Supreme Court in Brasilia, causing extensive damage. Around 1,500 sympathizers of right-wing Bolsonaro have been arrested for the time being. Many do not want to recognize the victory of new President Lula in the October election, and sounds very familiar to us, doesn't it? Because they suspect fraud because of the close election result, they repeatedly call for military intervention. Sounds familiar. The left-wing politician Lula expressed the suspicion that the rioters, for example with members of the military and the federal police of the capital district, had made arrangements during the storming of the government district in the capital. Out of distrust, he had already relieved several dozen members of the military from their duties in the presidential residence and renewed the head of the police force. In the course of their investigations into the family of US President Joe Biden, the US Republicans now want information about the art shops of his son Hunter. Republican chairman of the Key Committee on Oversight and Reform, James Comer, wrote in a letter to New York gallery owner George Berger, published on Wednesday, he is demanding information about the anonymous buyers of Hunter Biden artworks that he has exhibited. Although this is an inexperienced artist, he received exorbitant amounts of money for the sale of his works of art. Berger's deal with Hunter Biden raises questions about whether the Biden family is again selling access and influence. That's what he says, not what I says. Berger advertised that Hunter Biden's latest work of art was priced between $55,000 and $225,000, and it was worrying that President Biden's son is the recipient of anonymous high-value transactions without any accountability, as Comer said. Hunter Biden had his first exhibition at Georges Berger Gallery in New York in November 21. The New York Times wrote at the time that it was certainly more than the work of an amateur. But the exhibition with Biden's abstract art should not make anyone green with envy. In the runaway 2020 election battle, the son of then presidential candidate Joe Biden had become a fixture of then-President Donald Trump's camp. Hunter's lucrative post on the board of directors of the Ukrainian gas company Burisma, while his father was the vice president under Barack Obama, left Biden in need of explanation. Trump had also repeatedly alluded to Hunter's drug addiction. Confidential government papers have also been found on former Vice President Mike Pence now. They were discovered at his home in Indiana last week, that his attorney wrote in letters seen by Reuters on Tuesday. In a letter dated January 18th, the lawyer informed the National Archives of the find. In another letter on January 22nd, he told the archives that the FBI had seized the documents at Pence's house. Papers classified as confidential had previously been discovered in ex-President Donald Trump and his successor, President Joe Biden's houses. The documents at Biden came from his time as vice president of Barack Obama. Independent special prosecutors were deployed in both cases. After the report about the first finds at Biden, Pence, vice president of Trump and a member of the Republican Party, sought legal advice out of sheer caution, and he had the files checked. A small number have been deemed sensitive, is what his attorney wrote in the January 18th letter. They were immediately placed in a safe, and Pence asked the National Archives for instructions on how to properly handle them. The FBI then picked up the papers from Pence's home on January 19th. After several other countries, Canada has now also announced deliveries of main battle tanks to Ukraine and wants to send 4 Leopard models to the war zone as a first step. The delivery will take place in the coming weeks, is what Defense Minister Anita Anand said at a press conference in Ottawa on Thursday. In addition, Canadian soldiers should support their Ukrainian counterparts in commissioning the tanks. Also, Canada is considering sending more tanks at a later date. On Wednesday, the German federal government decided that Germany would hand over 14 Leopard 2A6 main battle tanks to the Ukrainians as a first step. Other countries should also get permission to hand over German-made tanks to Ukraine. The unrest in Peru continues. In Lima, among other places, there have been serious clashes between demonstrators and police officers. Human rights activists criticized the fact that there were only few reactions internationally. During protests in Peru after the impeachment and arrest of former President Pedro Castillo, serious clashes broke out again between demonstrators and police officers. We regret that the number of injured continues to rise and that the protests are being carried out with violence, said Alberto Huerta, the ombudsman for human rights in the capital Lima, in a tweet on Tuesday evening. And he said that several people have been arrested. And according to the Peruvian broadcaster RPP Noticias, more than 6,800 security forces were deployed in the center of Lima. The police used tear gas and opponents of the government threw stones. Peru's President Dina Boluarte called on all groups involved in the unrest to sign a truce. In this way, dialogue tables could be set up and an agenda set and developed for each region. The right to protest should not go hand in hand with violence, destruction and death, Boluarte said, according to a report by the Spanish-language broadcaster CNN en Español. She invited the Human Rights Commission to investigate the incidents. More than 50 people have died in the South American country since the protests began in December. Human rights activists in Peru accused the world community of having largely forgotten their country. The silence of large parts of the states in the region and in the rest of the world leaves the impression that we are alone, criticized Jenny Dador, executive secretary of the Peruvian Coordinator for Human Rights. None of the states in the region have done anything concrete, she said. The demonstrators, many from the poor south of the country, are demanding the resignation of interim President Dina Boluarte, the dissolution of Congress, and the release of imprisoned ex-President Castillo. He wanted to forestall a no-confidence vote in December and dissolved Congress. Parliament then removed him from office. He was arrested on charges of an attempted coup and is still in custody. Both the German and the Brazilian government want to boost the negotiations on a free trade agreement between the EU, the European Union, and the South American Confederation Mercosur. State Secretary for Economic Affairs Franziska Brandner said on Thursday in the Bundestag that work is being done in close coordination with the European Commission and the other member states to find solutions quickly. Brandner flies to Argentina, Chile, Brazil with Chancellor Olaf Scholz at this weekend. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva is also pushing for an agreement. The agreement with the EU is urgently needed, said Lula on Wednesday in Uruguay's capital Montevideo. He recalled that such an agreement had already been discussed during his first 2 terms of office from 2003 to 2010. In Montevideo, Lula also advocated joint negotiations between Mercosur and China. The EU has been negotiating a trade deal with Mercosur, and that's Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay and Uruguay, for a long time. In 2019, the negotiators agreed on the agreement. The treaty would create the largest free trade area in the world with around 780 million people. However, implementation has stalled. Brandner said the federal government is committed to ratification, but with verifiable binding protection of environmental, social and human rights, and with an enforceable supplementary agreement to preserve the green lungs of the earth. According to Brandner, the fact that the EU and the Mercosur countries have not made any progress on the trade agreement in recent years is due to the massive and uncontrolled deforestation, especially in the Amazon region under the right-wing extremist President Jair Bolsonaro. The left-wing politician Lula da Silva, who was sworn in as president for the 3rd time on January 1st, was not considered a green in his previous terms of office, but has now promised to focus on environmental and climate protection. The German Conservatives called on the federal government to speed up. They would work to ensure that the agreement is ratified this year, said Christian Democrat MP Stefan Rauenhoff. An application by the union faction states that almost 250,000 jobs in Germany are already due to exports to Mercosur. Free trade with the Mercosur countries creates new export opportunities and sales markets for the European and German economy, he said. Conversely, Brazil, the largest economy in Latin America with its enormous natural resources, is an interesting partner given the tense situation on the energy and food markets due to the Ukraine war. Neighboring Argentina has already offered itself as an energy supplier for Germany. And this concludes this week's video on the politics of the Americas. And there'll be another video tomorrow on the next topic. And I'll see you there. I'll be back.